Welcome. My name is Paul London and I'm the Student Money Advice Team Leader at Bournemouth University. This presentation will cover BU financial support for Wiltshire College students on franchised courses for the 21-22 academic year. We will cover a brief introduction to student finance, how to budget your loan, additional financial support from BU, external funding and additional resources, and all the important contact details should you need to speak to someone about your financial situation. So first of all, as you may already know, it's important for all students to apply for their funding through Student Finance England, Wales, Northern Ireland, or the Student Awards Agency Scotland as early as possible. This is usually from March each year. For students who apply after May, there is no guarantee their funding will be ready to pay for when their course starts in September. So for those that do apply late and their funding approved later, then their funding will be paid at a later date. Typically, it takes 6 weeks for an application for funding to be assessed with your funding provider. This will take longer if your funding provider requests more information from you. And if you have not heard anything from your funding provider after 6 weeks of applying or providing information, you should contact them as soon as possible to resolve any potential delays. The student loan is paid at the start of each term or semester, so typically by the end of September when the course starts, the start of January and April. If you are still waiting for your funding provider, so Student Finance England, Wales, Northern Ireland, or the Student Award Agency Scotland to assess your application when you start, your loan will be paid later. Therefore, it is important to have some spending money in case your loan is paid a bit late. We will cover the emergency loan later for those students that need assistance whilst they wait for their loan to be paid. Your first loan will need to cover your living costs, such as rent, bills, travel, food, so on and so forth. And this will be from the end of September to the end of December. So that's your first loan. It is therefore important to budget. The Student Union Advice Team can help with budgeting and money management, and we will provide those details later. So if we have a look onto the BU website in terms of living costs and budgeting, we will see that there is plenty of information for students on these types of things. So first of all, living expenses. There is a very useful table that details the costs of things like rent, bills, travel, household items such as toiletries and essentials such as food, laundry costs, and so on and so forth. Obviously, for every student, these costs could be different, and it may be different for those students on different courses as well, depending on course materials. So it's worth having a look just to see some of the costings, and then you can compare that with your student loan and any other funding that you might be receiving from family, for example, and see where that fits in with your budget. It's also important to think about budgeting. Obviously, there's a lot of information on the BU website in terms of the basics of budgeting, takes you through different steps on how to work out a budget and some useful links in terms of a student budget calculator. Always important to plan ahead. There's some tips for saving money and also some useful apps to track spending. So worth having a look. And then over the right hand side here, you'll see there is also a section about part-time work, which is also very useful. So worth having a look. To access these pages, you will see the website address at the top of this page, so you can just type that in, or if you just, for example, Google Bournemouth University budgeting, then you will arrive at these pages. What's also very useful on these particular pages are some videos from students who share their experience of managing their money, lots of tips about shopping, for example, some of the cheaper supermarkets like Aldi and Lidl, and also some good experience of buying food, freezing it. So lots of useful tips there. And I believe there's also some further videos on the living expenses page down the bottom from some other students as well, so worth having a look at. So if we head back to the presentation, onto the next page, we'll now look at some of the funding that Bournemouth University offers. So the first one to mention is the Bournemouth University bursary. So this is typically offered to those students from low household income backgrounds. So those students where their household income has been assessed by their funding provider, Student Finance England. If the income is 16,000 or below, then students could be eligible for the £800 bursary that Bournemouth University offer. This bursary is not paid on placement or repeat study years. There's also the Care Leaver bursary, as mentioned, for those students from care experienced backgrounds, and this award is potentially £3,000 each year, and the same rule applies that this fund is not paid on placement year or repeat study years. Students can only qualify for one of these bursaries, and this is automatically assessed by BU using the information that Student Finance England provide us. So when students make their applications and provide their household income, that information will be provided to BU to assess students for this bursary. It's very important to note that these bursaries are only open to students that are living in England, so those that are assessed by Student Finance England. If students are assessed by any of the other domiciled funding providers, so Wales, Northern Ireland or Scotland, then they would not be eligible for the bursary. Again, worth having a look on the website for more details on the bursaries as to the eligibility criteria, as well as how that funding is paid to students. So moving on, we'll now go into a bit more detail about some of the extra funding that students can access whilst they're on their course, whilst they're in study and enrolled on their course. So there's a brief list of some of the support that's available, but to show you in more detail, it's best to head over to the website again to have a look to see what funding is available. So again, if you just Google Bournemouth University financial support, this is the page that will probably come up that you can then explore from there. Or again, you can obviously have a look at that link and just type that in to your web browser to access this particular page. So as I mentioned, this is a landing page. So there's some information, general information about how to access some of this support, some COVID information, and some general information about obviously what we've already discussed around loans and the government support that's available. So what we'll do here is just go into a bit more detail about some of the funding that students can access who are studying at Wiltshire College on one of our franchised courses. So down the right hand side, you will see there's a long list of different categories, mainly in relation to the funding that is on offer, the bursaries obviously we've mentioned, and then further down there's some other information which we'll touch on towards the end of the presentation. So first of all, worth having a look at the BU Financial Support Fund. This is the main fund that could potentially help students that are in financial difficulty. So those students that are receiving their student finance, their loans, in some cases grants, and also potentially money from family, if that income is not enough to cover a student's essential expenditure, so rent, bills, travel, course equipments, and so on, then we would invite a student to contact Ask BU and ask to apply for the Financial Support Fund. We would then have a look at the application. The student would need to provide evidence, and we would have a look to see if that income is covering their essential expenditure. So obviously we're looking to see that students obviously are using their money to spend on essentials such as rent, travel, bills, etc., and see if there is a shortfall. And if there is, then we would look to potentially assist that student through this fund. So it's all about the student demonstrating that they don't have enough money to cover their essential expenditure. So then moving on to the next fund, one very sort of obviously relevant at the moment that will run for this academic year again, is the BU COVID-19 Impact Support Fund. So this will open at the start of the academic year from the 20th of September. Students again can make an application if they've been impacted by COVID. So for those students that maybe have lost their job since the start of the academic year or have had to self-isolate due to having coronavirus, then we can look to support those students with a small amount of money, £200, just to help them through those couple of weeks where maybe they're waiting for new employment, or they are self-isolating and therefore can't work. So it's really just to provide a bit of support to help with things such as, you know, food and essential household items. The next fund to look at is the BU Laptop Support Fund. So for students that may be facing what is termed digital poverty, where, for example, they don't have their own kit, their own laptop, their own computer to undertake their studies, and maybe they don't have access to other resources, such as maybe some of the campus facilities, the computers, or if Wiltshire College offer their own facilities, if students can't access these for whatever reason, then this fund potentially can help. We are looking for students to demonstrate they are from a low household income background, so that would be 16,000 and below, just like our bursary. These funds typically that we're discussing are for home students, so that pay a home fee. So again, typically that are receiving money from a funding provider within the UK. Students obviously need to be fully enrolled on the course, and yeah, as mentioned, don't have access to a working laptop computer for study purposes, and as well as sort of declaring that they don't have the funds to buy the laptop in the first place. So students can apply for this fund by clicking on the link on the website. This will take students through to an application form to fill in a few questions, and then we will assess a student for this particular fund. Next fund to look at is the BU DSA Support Fund. This is to support students with disability. So there's 2 awards that students can qualify for from this particular fund. So those students that need a educational psychologist assessment, sometimes classed as a diagnostic assessment for a learning disability, often dyslexia, then there is a cost for students to access that assessment. BU can help towards that cost, and it is a contribution. So BU could look to offer £200 help towards this cost. We are looking for students to demonstrate that they can't cover this cost. So we are looking to see that students have, you know, little or no funds available. So bank statements would be asked for this purpose. And the second award that BU can offer is if DSA equipment is required. So usually student finance will be involved with this, where students will apply for DSA funding. Student finance will provide some of the funding for the equipment, but there is a £200 contribution usually expected from students to pay for the equipment, and we can look to cover that. Same rules apply. We're looking for students to demonstrate that they can't afford this cost. So we would assess a student based on their need for that. Again, students can apply through an online form by going on the website, clicking the link, and filling out that application form. Next fund to look at is the emergency loan. We spoke earlier in regards to those students that are waiting for their funding at the start of the academic year. So for those students that have applied late to student finance, or they are waiting for student finance to assess some more information, so they don't have their money. If students are struggling to cover food, travel, other essential household costs, then we can look to bridge that gap where they're waiting for their funding. So we can provide a small amount of money just to cover those essentials. So students would need to sort of demonstrate that they've applied for their funding, again, show that they have very little funds remaining, which is obviously the reason why they're applying. And then we would make a payment potentially to the student's bank account to help them out whilst they wait for their funding to arrive. To apply for this, you would need to contact Ask BU. Obviously, all the links are there over here on the website, how to contact them, and the details also will be provided at the end of this presentation. For students that have exhausted all other funding, then it's also worth looking at other funding that's available. So there's the Small Emergency Grant. So if you've looked at all other funding that might be available and you can't access this funding and you've got no money for food, then we can look to provide a small e-voucher, usually Asda, to help students just buy some food whilst they wait for their student finance to come in, or for their emergency loan to be paid if they've applied for that. So worth having a look at that one as well. So just heading back to the presentation. So it's always worth having a look to see what other funding is out there. So this might be external funding through charities, trusts and other organisations, as well as maybe tapping into other resources which might help with budgeting, saving money and general financial tips. BU have a lot of information on their website in regards to this. So as mentioned down the bottom of our page here, there is some links in terms of external funding. So just bring this up so we can have a little look. You will see that there is a whole list of different organisations, different websites that can help in a variety of ways. So some you may already be familiar with. So Citizens Advice, you know, they can obviously provide information on all kinds of things, from debt to those students with children if they're eligible for universal credit, you know, tax, all of those kind of things. Money Saving Expert, obviously Martin Lewis, National Debtline. Save the Student, that's always a good one to look at. There's lots and lots of information on there in regards to bank accounts, saving money, money saving tips, funding for international students as well. So it's worth having a look at that. There's a lot of budgeting spreadsheets and calculators on there, and you know how to search for work. So again, worth just scrolling through those pages to have a little look. As mentioned, always worth looking for external funding that might be available. So we've listed some local charities here where we know that students have actually applied and been successful for funding. So 3 charities and trusts there, worth having a little look at. If obviously those don't apply, then there is a fantastic grants database called Turn to Us. So on there you can put in your age, where you live, some other details, and it'll find any sort of grants that you might be eligible for, and then you can obviously make an application for those particular grants. Then it's worth also mentioning the postgraduate side of things. Even though typically Wiltshire College students are on undergraduate courses, BU do have a licence for our students to use the Alternative Guide to Postgraduate Funding. Although the name suggests it is for postgraduate, there is typically a lot of undergraduate funding opportunities on there as well. So again, worth registering, having a look, seeing what's there. You never know what might come up. Then sort of finally, in terms of the presentation, we do tend to just mention at the moment gambling awareness, because it is on the rise, especially amongst the student population. So there is just a lot of information about obviously the risks of gambling, how to stay safe if obviously someone chooses to gamble, you know, make sure it's, you know, stays fun, that students aren't, you know, spending more money than they can, you know, afford to lose. And then moving on to those situations that might obviously be more serious, where students might actually need help with gambling spending, or if they know someone who also might have or who might need help in terms of gambling. So there's some gambling counselling services, which is local SJ Counselling, and they offer a free gambling counselling service for students. A lot of information again to click on to just have a look. And then there's also some self-exclusion websites mentioned as well, where you can basically block gambling websites from your mobile phone, laptops and other devices. Then finally, to wrap up the presentation, just to let you know all the contact details. We went over the financial support pages, which is the top link there. And then you also have the Student Union Advice website link as well. The Student Union Advice service, as mentioned earlier, offer a whole range of support, not just around money, but they do offer budgeting advice, money management, some level of sort of debt help if needed, and to signpost to those relevant organisations to help students. So it's always worth getting in contact with them if you have any sort of money worries. But they'll also help with any accommodation issues, and any course worries and things like that. So it's always worth getting in touch if you have any concerns. In terms of the financial support that we've mentioned, the first point of contact for all students would be through the Ask BU service, who you may already be familiar with. So you can either drop them a line by telephone numbers there, or drop them an email. They're always happy to help. Sometimes they will then refer things onto the financial support team, which is the team I'm part of, if something's a bit more complex. So if students are having issues with Student Finance England or their funding provider, we can sometimes step in and try and resolve issues on students' behalf, if it is more complex. But the overall message is that for any student with financial difficulty, any problems with funding, is basically to get in contact with us, get in contact with Ask BU, and we will try and resolve any issues that you have.